Good morning, all. I'm gonna kind of call us to order. I know it's only 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, so thank you all for coming and welcome to the St. Paul campus. This is really an exciting day. I'm Kathy Drager, and I'm the statewide director of the U's Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. We've got a number of our board members and our executive directors and staff in the room. And we're having, really this is one of the first research convenings, or maybe the first research convening about deep winter greenhouses, passive solar deep winter greenhouses that has been held. So this is really kind of a groundbreaking day, and it's our first shot at finding out, from producers, what do they need? From our researchers, what are some questions, as well as questions from our producers. But I'm just going to take 1 second to talk about the University of Minnesota Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. So we were formed by the Minnesota legislature about 19 years ago. The purpose of our program is to make sure that university resources are at the service of people in greater Minnesota, that the university acknowledges that we have a lot of grassroots innovation at the local level, and when we bring that together with different ways of knowing, like at the university, that we can find elegant solutions to issues that communities face today. And we work specifically in the area of sustainable development, which is clean energy, sustainable agriculture and food systems, natural resources, and resilient communities and sustainable tourism. So you can see how something like a deep winter greenhouse really can touch on a lot of the areas that we work in. And I think the deep winter greenhouse, this project and this process really exemplifies our theory of change, which is if you are part of a community, listening to the community, you can find what are those next important ideas that need to be looked at and discussed. So deep winter greenhouses, this was an idea that came from the community. Carol Ford and her husband Chuck Weibel and other people in the state previous to that had built deep winter greenhouses and were looking at this as a form of passive solar production for greens in the deep winter. A few years ago, tragically, we lost Chuck, but his work continued on through a Bush Foundation grant that brought Carol in to work with us at the regional partnerships to start saying, okay, what is this deep winter greenhouse? How can we get the word out? What research needs to be done? And then we were very happy to find partners at the Institute on the Environment and with the Horticulture Department, with John Irwin, with a MnDRIVE food grant. That help us build more of a body of work, and also Extension invested some as well. And then more recently, we worked with the College of Design to get a prototype. So that is kind of what we call Deep Winter Greenhouse 2.0. And then with the support of some of our ag lending banks, the cooperatives, there are now 5 of these deep winter greenhouses being built across each of our 5 regional partnership regions in Minnesota. So that leaves us with a couple purposes for today. Number 1, with these 5 deep winter greenhouses being built, we need to really think through what questions do we have, what do we want to learn. If you've got 5 identical structures in 5 different areas of the state, what research can we ask for production or building performance or markets or how we are marketing these greens? Those are all questions that we can queue up now and start studying once the 5 deep winter greenhouses are up and running. Secondly, this is a fabulous network. The people in this room right now, we've got researchers, students, producers, we have extension, we have food safety, we have a lot of expertise and network in this room that can really help a new technology take off and maybe become more standard throughout the state and region and other countries even. And then our third objective for the day will be to look forward, and once we kind of identify what some of the next innovations or research can be, then to kind of gather those together. And part of my job is to help make sure we've got resources so that students and researchers can continue to look and answer these questions, and that we're supporting producers in helping us do on-farm in greenhouse research. And I'll just mention, some of the innovations that are already occurring using the Deep Winter Greenhouse as a solar dehydrator in the off season, or we have another producer who built a root cellar in conjunction with putting his Deep Winter Greenhouse in. And we've, yet to talk about what are some of the opportunities for rainwater collection and other, things that we can take advantage of with our Deep Winter Greenhouse. So I think there's more innovations on the horizon. We've got the people in the room to define that. And so I look forward to an exciting day. So thank you all.
All right. All right, everybody, welcome. It's nice to see you all. I'll start off by noting that there's microphones here, and when we later, if there's questions or if anybody in the audience says anything, we'll have microphones. It won't amplify, but we're being recorded for a WebEx video so that some of the partners who aren't here today can come back and watch this and provide input to us. So we'll be passing microphones around. Make sure you don't say anything naughty because we're recording and you might not notice. So we're really happy you could make it all here today. We have existing Deep Winter Greenhouse producers in the room. Can you raise your hands if you are last winter if you grew things in a greenhouse? 1, 2, 3. We're great. 4, 5. Yeah. So wonderful. So we have some faculty in the room. We have people who will be Deep Winter Greenhouse producers in the coming years. And so we have researchers. I see students. It's great. It's a great group. A little bit of housekeeping here. We have coffee over there, bagels. We'll have a break later on, but our schedule is really crammed tight. So there are bathrooms down the hall, so don't wait for the break because it might come and go. Go and do what you have to do, and don't worry about us. I have kids, so I'm used to thoughts of moving things in front of me, so we'll be all right. In front of you, there's note cards. We're not going to have questions after each of the presentations because we're kind of trying to cram it together. So write your questions on the note cards and we'll collect them, and there'll be a little question answer session. And we'll try to get to your notes. We probably aren't going to get to all your questions, but ideally in an ideal world, we'll be able to figure out ways to answer them and let you know and send out. I have all your emails, so we can send out answers to all of these questions and maybe get a dialogue going that way, even if it's not today. My name is Greg Swazer. I'm with the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. I've been working on Deep Winter Greenhouse projects for about 2 or 3 years now with Carol and Sue and Ryan, some of you out there. And it's been great work, and I'm excited to see it move forward. What do we have here? All right. So first, up here on the top right, and can you all see that? Is it too bright up here? Okay. Many of you know about a lot of this stuff. A lot of you are heavily involved, but in case some of you aren't, we've been working on this Deep Winter Greenhouse campaign. We've got project partners throughout all of Minnesota, these 5 areas in the Northeast. We have Organic Consumers Association in Finland. They couldn't be here today, unfortunately. Northwest, we have the Bemidji Community Food Shelf in Bemidji. Central Lakes College in Brainerd. Alternative Roots Farm in Medalia, and Lake City Catholic Worker Farm in Lake City. All these wonderful people have agreed to test out our prototype design that we've been working on. So they're going to be building our prototype and producing in there, and we're going to be holding research, doing research in those buildings, and we're going to be doing workshops and outreach activities and things like that. So this is a great opportunity for us to get together, figure out what we need to know, figure out how we're going to know it, and get it done on the ground here in Minnesota. So we're excited about that. That's great. Thank you very much to all those producers. Very happy that you're here and that you're willing to work with us here. So what do we research? Well, we're going to figure that out today, we hope. We'll start to begin to explore that today. But then to back up a little further, for some of you who might not know, really quickly, what do we consider to be this Deep Winter Greenhouse concept? There are a few design elements that are important to recognize. Usually, not always, but there is often a steep sloped, transparent glazing angle facing the south that allows the maximum amount of solar heat to come in on the shortest day of the year, the solstice, December 23rd, 4th, or 5th, whatever it is. That heat comes in, instead of being deflected off of what would be a 45-degree angle, comes in is stored underground in a rock bed way over there on the left. That's Finland, Minnesota. They've gotten their foundation built. A heavily insulated rock bed stores that heat. That heat comes up throughout the night into the ambient space up above and heats the air. So we no longer have to rely on fossil fuels, hopefully less with these prototypes than people have been. Thanks, Michelle. So we're really looking at this as a great opportunity to create food in the winter in Minnesota for greater food security and for our farmers and increased viability of small-scale farms. In the middle, this is one of our first passive solar greenhouses. This is Garden Goddess Greenhouse. And we've been working with Carol and Chuck, as we've heard before, on a lot of this stuff. A lot of this came from that original greenhouse, and we're making a lot of progress. A brief overview of some of the previous research. I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. Exactly a year ago today, we held a research convening where we talked about, or a research seminar, I think we called it, where we talked about some of our ongoing and recent research, and a lot of the results for that are available online, and I think there's a link I sent out on a few emails, so if anybody needs to figure out how to get that, I can get that back to you. But for more details, you can look at that. But I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. We found that the photosynthetic rate of deep winter greenhouse crops optimize carbon dioxide and light better than similar crops in conventional greenhouses. You can see with the kale, those are graphs. If you can read small graphs up there, you'll get that figured out. Energy audits. We've done energy audits in existing deep winter greenhouses and find some of the leaky spaces and leaky spots and figured out how to make those more efficient with our prototype design. We've done some preliminary enterprise analysis and figured out that, yes, indeed, some people can make money off of deep winter greenhouses. Someone made $20 an hour, which for farming is really good money. And that's great. But there were some limitations. There were only a small handful of people in that study, so we don't really know what that range is. Ryan will talk a little bit more about that later on today, too. There's an issue with soil nitrate that we have uncovered that might need more examination. With the greens in the winter, they don't use as much of the nitrogen in the soil, so it gets built up in the tissues, which is a health issue. So there's something there to look into, and Carl Rosen will be talking about that a little bit later. We had a high school student go out in these polluted ponds and collect duckweed and use it for fertilizer. How great is that? But in addition, comparing that to the other fertilizer, there were not higher rates of E. coli and coliforms in the soil. So that's an option for using our phosphorus that we put on our crops that goes into our wetlands to put back in our greenhouses and maybe create a loop there. So with that, just a brief overview of the day. We're going to hear from some deep winter greenhouse producers that haven't been part of our fold traditionally. We're excited to hear from some of the newcomers and see what they can teach us. We're going to see some presentations about the past and future research opportunities, and we'll hold some discussion and try to come up with some of our research goals for these 5 prototypes. So the note cards, make sure to keep any questions handy on those note cards, and we'll get to them. So real quick, we don't have an awful lot of time. Again, there's 40 people in this room approximately, and when we usually do this, it usually takes a couple hours because everyone talks about where they grew up and where they went to school and all their kids and all that. So we're going to go around the room really quick, just answer these questions and pass it on. Your name, where are you from, what do you do, farmer, researcher, student, etc. So we'll start over here with Kim. And we can, okay, thanks.
Okay. I'm Kim Erickson. I'm from northern Minnesota, up by Deer River, Minnesota, and I have a winter greenhouse, and so I guess I'm a producer.
Hi, my name is Joel Tollickson. I'm a researcher. I currently work at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, and I'm interested in energy issues, although my background is in plant sciences, so it kind of works together.
Hello, my name is David Flugel. I work with the Regional Sustainable Development Partnership. My office is in Morris alongside Joel.
Hi, my name is Todd Carney. I'm with United FCS. We're in ag financing. Our corporate headquarters are in Wilmer, Minnesota.
I'm Doug Francho. I'm on the Northeast Board of the Regional Partnerships, and I come from International Falls, where we really need these.
Partnership. Eugene.
I'm Hikari Peterson. I'm in the Department of Applied Economics, like a few.
Sustainability food systems.
From here, the University of Minnesota education program.
Annalisa Hultberg. I work alongside with Michelle doing outreach on food safety and gaps for farmers.
Courtney Cheetah. I work here at the University of Minnesota with the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and the Student Organic Farm.
John Irwin, Department of Horticultural Science.
And I'm Carl Rosen, Department of Soil, Water, and Climate here at the university.
Ryan Pesch, Pelican Rapids, producer, extension educator. I'm switching it up.
I'm Sue Wicca from Ashby, and I run Reality Greenhouse.
Hank Ledke, Mayor of Frazee, Central Regional Sustainable Development Partnership, and Central Steering Committee, State Coordinating Committee.
And I'm Sarah Freed. I'm from Lake City, which is in the southeast of Minnesota, at the Lake City Catholic Worker Farm, and we will be a producer when we build our deep winter greenhouse next year.
Hi, I'm Rose Clark. I am serving a AmeriCorps Conservation Corps term with the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, and I live up in Crookston.
Hi, I'm Liz Perkis. I'm a grad student here at the U of M in plant science.
Jim Donchi, Gustavus Adolphus College, directing the Johnson Center for Environmental Innovation.
Hannah Clem. I'm with the Food Shelf Farm in Bemidji.
Dan Handine, originally from Montevideo, now live in Minneapolis. I'm at the Center for Sustainable Building Research at the U.
Brooke Nisley, Medelia, New Ulm area, Alternative Roots Farm. We're building one of the prototypes next.
Carol Ford, I have Garden Goddess Produce, and I work for the partnership out of Morris, and I live in Milan.
Liz Bellina, I have a greenhouse based on Carol's design some years ago, retired.
Hi, I'm Linda Kingery. I serve the Northwest Regional Sustainable Development Partnership. My office is in Crookston.
I'm Mary Rogers, Assistant Professor in the Department of Horticultural Science right here.
Dan Moe from Hutchinson. I'm an organic market farmer.
Connie Carlson. I work statewide on sustainable ag and food with Greg and Karen.
Great. That was the quickest introduction. Okay, I'm going to bring up Jim Donchi here, and we're going to get this show moving. Thanks. Here you go. You just forward this. However you like. So is your current slide your next?
Okay, everybody can hear me? Sometimes I talk a little softly. I feel like a little pretender here. He called me a producer. Where am I at? And he said, I didn't know you were doing this down there. Well, the truth of the matter is this is a project that has developed over the last several years and is still developing. And it says, well, we intend to produce, and we have produced greens for our cafeteria at Gustavus. We're down in St. Peter, for those who don't know. We really have an educational agenda with this. And the background on this, I'm going to have to tell a little bigger story than the greenhouse to understand why we did what we did. We have something kind of unique among colleges, particularly among private colleges. We own and operate our own cafeteria, which is pretty rare. Quite often it's farmed out, subcontracted to a larger producer. But we own it lock, stock, and barrel and operate it. And you know, the nice little backstory of that is compared to our peer groups of institutions, we're at the bottom of the list on price. Part of what we've done, though, is a unique model. It's an a la carte cafeteria. It's not all you can eat. You can come in anytime from 7 to 11 and find something, and somebody from the community can come in and get a glass of water and pay nothing, or you can get a full meal if you're coming in at the right time. It changes a whole lot of dynamics. They were supportive of the idea of food composting. What am I talking about food composting? You'll see in a bit here. Our physical plant operation actually was supportive of it. At one point, our waste was composted through our waste hauler, but they stopped doing that. We had a really strong interest in student activism about composting. The Senate passed a resolution that we should do it, the Student Senate. In 2009, after many years of talking about it, we actually got a student garden going, and it's been operating every summer since. But right away, the students were saying, we've got a problem here. This is educational. School ends in May, and guess when the growing season kind of starts. So the idea was there, maybe we need a greenhouse, and I had a group of students explore the idea in 2009 in an environmental studies senior seminar course, actually using Carol and Chuck's book as one of the things they were looking at. It was just out then, and it was a really useful resource for actually what could be done. Well, at that point, it was an idea. But then we got some funding, in a rather surprising way. We ran, this doesn't happen too often, but we had a granting agent come to us. They had come to us. Actually, it was a complicated gift. It involved some stock that we couldn't sell right away, and then suddenly we could sell it. And it was directed to our environmental studies program. Because of the groundwork of those students, the faculty said, let's do the greenhouse composter project with part of it. So we had our funding base. We added some internal funds. I worked from my budget. It's a small enough institution, we can do some cooperation stuff. The solar air heat panels actually came out of an NSF grant that was doing renewable energy education. We had some left over. We got permission to use it for that. The reality, though, is this didn't happen. Got ahead of myself here. I'm looking at the slides here and getting a little confused. There's some unique things about design here. Even though we were in an institutional context, we didn't have a budget for an architect and a full project developed. We were going to try and put this project together. I was going to try and put this project together without an architect, integrating, in a sense, off-the-shelf solutions to put them together. The composting operation, we settled on a vessel composter, but right about that time, the Minnesota PCA was looking at compost regulations, and there was some real uncertainty where we fell. We'd been in the backyard composting zone, and actually I think we still are, but there was a question of where we would end up. I talked to the regulators, and if we put the finished compost under a roof, they were happy. So we ended up with a rather large building to do that in, and it also stores our carbon source during the winter. We wanted some flexibility for experimentation and research, but we still wanted it to be a production facility. We wanted to grow food for our cafeteria. Development, since it was really kind of my project at that point and we weren't hiring outside, it became kind of a long process. 2012, 2013, we're figuring this out. We chose the composter vessel. I found a company out east that did conventional greenhouses that had integrated one as a lean-to on a building before. They actually had a picture on their website. They were willing to work with me to work it out. We settled on Morton Buildings for the pole barn that would go with it, and I did shuttle diplomacy between them really to match it up with the height of the composter. This little area where the composter was and that roof line was a critical issue. And so the Morton building got taller as we went along. Fortunately, it turns out that that's the cheapest way to add size to a Morton building, is to go taller. It doesn't create a lot of useful space, but you can do that. Then May 2013, the pole building went up. And if you know about that Morton building operation, that was a 5-day affair. It was pretty fast. Now, I did gain some benefit there. The footings and the base for the posts of the greenhouse needed to go in, and I hired the Morton building crew to do that because that's something they do really well and fast, and it was like a small add-on for them. So it got some work done. We got the composter vessel in July 2013, and this is how things work. Sometimes at a small institution, sometimes things are slow, sometimes they're fast. I thought it would take us 2 months over the summer to get the composting going. In 2 weeks, our grounds crew was doing all the food waste. Just boom, we started cold turkey and went very well. We've had some bumps along the way, but it's been working remarkably well considering the expertise we had to start out with. got the greenhouse frame mostly up in fall of 2013 with our physical plant staff, and then things stalled. They got pulled away to another project. Winter happened. There were some staffing cuts, some other projects going on, and not much was happening. Suddenly, late summer of 2014, our physical plant director said to me, "I'm sorry, but we are not going to get to this." And I sort of said, "What am I going to do?" I looked at my schedule. I had some room. I went to work. I learned how to run the lift. I did get some help from physical. There was a ridge piece that had to go in. Really needed heavy equipment, and I had five guys on the heavy equipment down, and they got it up in the morning. But it was a race. I got the last bit of glazing on the day of the first snow that year, and that was a year when things kind of clamped down starting in November 7th. I can remember it extremely well. It was really nice right up till then, and the night before I was finishing, I was like, oh, I've got to get fill around the bottom there, and stuff's going to freeze. And at 7 a.m. I was calling our groundskeeper, "Can I get some fill over there?" And they were there shoveling it in place, and we got the job done. So, but that was just the shell. Then we kind of went into a hiatus. I had to do a departmental review the next spring for our environmental studies program. That was kind of consuming all my time. Students did do some hydroponic projects in there. It was a group wanted to do that, and they used that as a space for that. And I think in that summer, they also, the student gardeners grew some kind of squash crop and some tomatoes in there, just kind of used the space. It was not the most sophisticated work. I caught them using a lawn sprinkler for irrigation at one point. A little problem with the ground fault interrupters on the electrical outlets with that. And then the real hiatus happened is in fall of 2015. I'd made a commitment to do a study abroad program in India, and I was gone. So it kind of sat there. Came back in 2016, and got to work, got the solar air heat system in. There was some work on the biofilter. We did a growing cycle. I got the back wall of that insulated and really got it to the point where it is usable. I'll give you just some overview. That was the composter vessel coming into place, and you can see the pilings with the footing for the greenhouse. It really was kind of a kit greenhouse. All the parts came and a set of plans on how to do it. They provided some engineering. And generally, they got it well. There was one dimension on the roof vent where we had to call them up, say these aren't the right size. But they did a remarkable job in getting this off-the-shelf product adapted to a different situation. I was pretty happy with the support I got on that. End of August, I was getting the sand bed in. Some choices here, and I'll mention this later. I'm not totally sure I made the right choices. I did insulate underneath it. Maybe that's not needed. There's the insulation was undercovered by sand already. I used sand. I'm not sure. It might have been something coarser, might have been better. I had the sand. We'd had a failure in our hockey rink that required a very rapid refitting. Hockey's a big sport for us, both men's and women. And they put in a temporary rink that involves PEX tubing and sand. And then the following year, when there was more time, they fixed it properly, and we had a big pile of sand. So I used that. I'm not sure it was the right choice, and we can redo this if we have to. There's a way to change this. Got that in place. Then things sat, and if you look carefully here, you can see there was a fine crop of weeds in there. And then went to work, and this was right about that November 7th time. I don't actually have the door, the walk door in, but got things in place and had a shell. There was this hydroponic project. Students, what we're trying to do is think about if we're growing on the ground, can we use that back wall, which is quite tall? Can we have something operating there? And the idea is eventually to have maybe kind of a greenhouse within a greenhouse, a shell that holds some heat in. And maybe you can heat that in the coldest part of the winter by heating the water only, just keeping the water going, and do some really cold weather production. We'll see how that works. There's a ways to go on that project. This is how it looked when I got done this spring. The biofilter is just important. The composter does stink. With the biofilter, it's far worse outside than inside. Makes a big improvement. The funny stacked design, my first design, really stunk. It didn't work well. It short-circuited. Biofilter is just a pile of wet wood chips. By stacking those plastic containers up, we can now reach in there with a piece of equipment we have that's kind of like a big forklift and not even go in the building and take those out and change the wood chips. It's going to be a lot less work, and it saves space. That's part of trying to capture some of the heat of the composting operation, because that's taking air off the headspace of the composter, running it through those wood chips, and it's dropping the heat that's in the moisture in there so that it's staying, some of that's staying within the building. We've got the distribution for the solar air heat. You can kind of see the growing beds and the view in front of the building. This is an example of the in-kind stuff I got. I didn't ask for paving in front of there. They were just paving the road and said, "Oh, let's do it." That's the kind of place we are. You know, let's clean this up, and that was helpful. And there's our first. Here's our first crop last spring, and you'll probably wonder what's the sort of lack of stand there. One of my early startups with that batch was a few mice and a gopher had found that warm greenhouse to be quite friendly. And even when I first sort of sealed things up, the gopher found a way to get back in. Eventually, he did go into my box trap and had a long trip to the country and didn't come back. But he did trim off a few things along the way. The mice met a worse fate. But so that gives you some sense. We do have, and there's another tank now too. We're catching some of the rainwater. Actually, we have plenty of rainwater if we can find a way to manage it. Some specifications, it's about 15 by 72, a little approximate because we had to shorten the greenhouse a bit to make it fit with the pole building. The composter vessel passes through double wall polycarbonate. It does have an automated ridge vent and window vents, and that is really helpful. It does help manage things very well. A student took some volunteer tomato plants that had come up in there and did a whole tomato crop this summer, and we really didn't have any trouble with it overheating. Managed pretty well. We've got the 6-inch drain tiles underneath the sand in a reverse return so it balances the flow, and then the air heat panels and the wood chip biofilter. Costs. Obviously, this is not a farm project. It's in an institutional context. We had a grant. The composter was probably $120,000 for the vessel. The pole building was somewhere around $60,000. The greenhouse kit was pretty cheap. It was about $35,000 for that. And then there were a lot of things like cement and other things going in. The solar air heat panels was about $10,000, again, grant money. And I was tapping into my budget. I got a fair amount of in-kind from our physical plant when they had time to do things. And some of the costs of this are driven by the institutional setting. I got heavy-duty doors on that building. I didn't ask for them. I got them because that's how we do it. I got a phone because that's how we do it when you have employees. The things like that were happening along. I got a vent in the building that is not used at all because our groundskeeper, when it was going up, thought he really needed a vent in there. He thought it would get too hot. I got 2 of them, in fact. And I didn't have any choice in that. But I also got a lot of cooperation, so I'm not going to complain too much. A lot of research agenda, and this is just beginning. This was some soil temperatures from last spring. And you're obviously seeing some response to the sun. The high spikes are the shallow soil temperature, so it's giving you some idea of what the air temperature is doing in there. This was deeper soil temps, kind of following that. I take this with a grain of salt because what would this have done without that soil air heating under there? And we need to set up some controls and figure out what's going on. It's one of the next things to do to talk about unfinished business is I need to get in there and work on some monitoring. There's some more air sealing that's done. It's not as tight as it could be. I got to pressurize that rainwater system. It doesn't work with the timer without some pressure. And I need to get some kind of pressurization. Work more on that hydroponic design and any kind of vertical growing. What can we do hanging in there? And certainly a lot of instrumentation and control. And goes without speaking, a lot of working with the students to figure out a production cycle. Being kind of a selective liberal arts school, we don't have a lot of ag students. We have a lot of interested students, and they come from different levels of knowledge on this and different levels of skill. I'm always sort of, okay, can you build? And I do have some of those. And we have some that are pretty dedicated. That tomato crop last summer and somewhat the lettuce crop was one student who's not really an ag student, but just really strongly interested, who likes to get up early in the morning. So she goes and spends 15 minutes in there on her way to doing something else and gets a lot done. So I'm always looking for my opportunities of who I can work with, and sometimes progress depends on what skills are coming in the room. Some design, second thoughts, questions, wish I could have, would have. The size of that building and the greenhouse shape, I would have liked to try some different things. I worked with the standard sizes that I could get at the time. Should I be insulated under those beds? What kind of storage media? Could we have skipped the solar panels? I've got a compromise there because the solar panels, the best way to mount them was on the front. I'm losing some light in the summer. Would it be better not to do those and just use heat from the space of the building like some of you are doing, which is better? And this is set up flexibly enough we can probably investigate some of that. I can change the heat source on one of those beds and run something else through it and play with it that way. Was that vessel composter the right choice? We could have done something more cheaply, would have required more labor to run without a vessel composter. And this was a big regret. I knew about this, but I couldn't fit it in the budget, which is why I'm questioning that large building. There is a company out east that does a heat exchanger that can capture heat from a composting operation. Uses heat pipe technology. It was about $25,000 at that point. And it's very intriguing. I would have loved to try it. Maybe I can find some money at some point to give it a try. And then one thing that I really didn't think about, but I was having some trouble with leaks, particularly somewhere around that ridge vent. And I realized that maybe I just caused a real big problem because all the rainwater from that big building, half of that big building, comes off the roof and hits that ridge vent. That was the problem. Eventually I found where the leaks were and I got rid of them. It was just a matter of tracking it down, and it wasn't that there was too much water hitting it, but I really didn't think about the implications of having a whole other building dumping water onto that roof. And then the question is, if you're going to use rainwater, can you find a way to capture that large enough tank? So those were some wish I could have, should have kinds of things, just in retrospect. So as I've mentioned, we've just got some plans. We want to try and really get some high production out of there. I think it's got some real potential to, particularly the spring and fall time, to really pump it out, but we've got to learn how to do that. Monitoring the temperature, comparison to those heat sources. Could we add some thermal mass and make that work? Obviously, we're going to have some pest issues. We didn't have a lot of trouble last spring, a few aphids on the spinach, but it's probably going to be coming. Compost management, maybe we can use some CO2 from that to enhance production. What kind of crops to grow, and of course our students are, and I am too, interested in hydroponics. We actually do have a tank. We were just pulling it into the greenhouse last night. So we'll hold the questions till the end, but thank you. Oh yeah.
All right. Next, we'll have Kim Erickson from Deer River. I'll give you a little card when you're 2 minutes.
Okay.
My notes here. All right, so my name is Kim Erickson. My husband is Ryan. He's not here, but he was a huge part of doing this. Kind kind of as I think back, a few years ago, used to grow a lot of stuff in the basement. We do a lot of, we do farming in general. We have animals, we do gardens. And I always wanted to be able to grow stuff out of season. And I always bugged my husband about a greenhouse. And it always seemed really impractical, right, to heat a greenhouse and do these things. So I stumbled on somehow, right? You guys are probably familiar with this, right? And the Northlands Winter Greenhouse Manual, right? And I read it and I'm like, this is awesome, right? This is what I need to do. This will let me, grow things during the winter and not have to think about how do I heat this space to be able to grow things. And I started talking to my husband about it and he's like, really? I mean, can't you just grow stuff in the summer? And he wasn't totally on board. But I kind of get things like this in my head and I can't get rid of it. And it was probably even a year or so after I had got this book that we were able to go to the Paradox Farm all day, kind of seminar and doing this. And I got him to go with me. And he really was inspired by that. And so, we took lots of pictures, talked about it, enjoyed the greens, the fresh greens, and kind of brought us on our journey. We did that in March, and by the next fall, I'm like, all right, let's build it. And he's like, you still want to do it? I'm like, yes, I really still want to do it. So we did it. So we built a 14 by 24, and it's pole construction. So it's not, we didn't do any cement work. We used 10 millimeter twin wall polycarbonate. We attached it to an existing structure, which is just kind of our woodshed, really. So it's not really a space we live in or anything like that. It was a pole building that was existing. It did have a concrete floor. So we kind of attached onto that. And that was sort of strategic because we use it for our backup heat. We have a heat exchanger in the corner that comes off the same wood boiler we use to heat our house. So the peak height from the ground is 14 feet, and that was sort of because the wood stove height was 12 feet. And the gable end, we're butting up against the gable end, so we had to be just over that peak. But it's a real narrow roof, so we have a real, not much grade coming down, but it's not very big, so. And we don't have any running water, so that might be a little different. We did not put in a hydrant. Just logistics didn't make that happen, and I was like, hey, I can give up on that if we can get it built. So we use a 55-gallon drum kind of up on a stand, and we fill that and use a hose and gravity feed. So it can be done. It worked. We did that all winter. So we built this September 2015. We built in about 3 weeks. We did it pretty much all ourselves. So my husband's really handy, and he committed his time for it. So that was pretty awesome. So here's kind of some pictures of our construction. You can see this, here's the wood stove, and you see the chimney there. We did come out 6 feet here, and we made kind of a walkway, so that part isn't heated. There's a doorway into that. Real similar to, we pretty much followed this and the pictures from the Paradox Farm, because theirs was also a pole construction. We had taken down a silo, an old silo, and so we had all these concrete pieces. So that's what you see down here. We kind of lined the bottom with these chunks of concrete. We didn't have quite enough rock in one delivery, and we didn't want to get another one. So we chose to do that. We did not insulate underneath. So you use these concrete. It actually worked out really well because we were able to use our Bobcat to dump the rock on top of the drain tile, where we probably couldn't have without that layer because it would just churn up the sand. So we have sand underneath. And it actually went really fast putting the rock down because we were able to just dump bucket loads with the Bobcat over the top. It was a little tight to drive up in there. And you'll see all this bracing here. This is because here are these pipes that come out and they run underground for our hot water system. And we actually had marked it the one day, and my husband backed up with a tractor the next day and he drilled there. He just, like, we had marked it and we knew we couldn't do it there. We were just gonna brace it. And then so then he spent a day fixing it. He had to like, dig out the pipes, and it's just one of those things, right? So anyway, let's see. So we have the buried rock. I think it's about 18 inches of 1.5-inch rock. Pretty much following the book, right? That from Carol and Chuck. We initially set it all up to like have the duct fans push the air, you know, and we did modify it after the meeting a year ago, listening to some of the new research, and you can see my husband's like, oh, it's all cobbled up. I'm like, yeah, I know, but we were moving stuff around, so we had put quite a few PVC pipes down when we put it in. And so we took a bunch of them, like 4 of them, and put the duct fans pulling the air in different spots in the greenhouse. So we've been experimenting with that. So yeah, they're on 6-inch PVC. We also have 3 55-gallon drums kind of on the back wall and the black barrels for retaining heat. I'm not sure that I could really tell you that this made a difference. You know, it's hard to really gauge. I do have a bunch of temperature monitoring I did a year ago, so we did this probably late December, so I might be able to compare like what it does. It's so hard though with outside temperatures and fluctuations. So I'm kind of a computer geek, so I kind of set up some temperature monitoring, and these are what I used. I have some information on it in here, but basically they're a little probe with a few wires, and you can like string these together. They're kind of cool. So I have an electrical engineering background, so that's part of my geekiness. No, seriously, so like it was Halloween on Monday, right? And my daughter, she's 15, she came to me and she's like, Mom, I want to be a geek for Halloween. I'm like, oh, okay. She's like, can I borrow one of your shirts? I'm like, sure. So anyway, that's just an aside. But so I have these all over. I have outside air. I have this here, this red is actually sitting in the black stovepipe that is running vertically, right? So the hot air is coming through there. This top one is actually our wood boiler. So I can kind of see when it calls for heat, right? Because that'll get hotter. I can also see if the fire goes out and it just is not supplying heat anymore. I have some that are in soil. I have some that are sitting in the PVC pipe, so they're just kind of resting on top of the rock. I'm not sure how to interpret sitting on top of the rock. I've had, like I don't know if maybe condensing moisture and then a movement of air makes them seem cooler than they should. I think it's a little bit tricky to interpret something from those that are sitting right on top of the rock. Like I wish I had some kind of buried down in the rock, which I don't have, because I didn't really think of it when we were burying rock. I have tried to like kind of dig in a spot and like we get it lower, but it's a little bit difficult. It's one of the things, if I could do it over, I probably would have done more with trying to have access lower in the rock. So this is 4 days, tried to mark it, and you can see the 2 really sunny days and the peaks in temperature. I find it really interesting to look at this this stuff. And I think it'll be fun, at least maybe on average, to compare this year to last year. And I'm hoping it would be useful to be able to tell that something I did made a change. Like if I'm getting better heat or retaining heat better, I guess we'll just have to see. I don't have enough data, I feel like, to really do that yet. This is just kind of zoomed in. I do have one right up at the very top of the greenhouse, so I can see what the temperature is there. And I have noticed that, like, when we exhaust heat, that we're really, it's up high, right? So the vent's up high and the intake's up high, and all my collecting of heat is up high. And so I notice when we're venting, all of a sudden the temperature drops up at the top where we're sucking in the air. So it's like, well, we probably should do something different there, right? Because we're pulling the cold air in at the same time. So just different things that it kind of helps to investigate. So this is these. If anybody's interested in these, let me know. These are cheap. These are like, seriously, like, I didn't put it on there, but Amazon, I got like 10 of these for like 20 bucks, right? And they're really cool. You can string them along on like just phone wire. The USB adapter's like 40 bucks. There are some programs out there, like, again, I'm a geek. I wrote my own little program, but they exist, right? So this is what we have. This was from last winter. We've got the gutters. They're all hanging. All of this stuff is, all that wood up there is just sitting there. Nothing's fastened down, so I can rearrange things. So we're pretty excited about it. We'd like to experiment a little bit with LED lights maybe to see, like in December. It's frustrating, like last December. Yeah, right? I mean, stuff just doesn't grow. We would love to build, well, I shouldn't say we, maybe I would love to build another greenhouse, but we'll see. Yeah, adding more sensors. You can get a humidity sensor with the same technology as this, so that would be kind of fun. What else? I don't know if I missed anything I was gonna say. Oh, just the one other thing is the people that, mostly I gave away greens last year. I did sell some. I would kind of bring a little box to people and like, hey, first one's free, right? And everybody who tried it loved it. They were super impressed with how long they lasted, right? You could keep it in the fridge for a week or more, and it's good, right? And the flavor and taste of them, they were just like in awe. You know, like my brother-in-law, he was like, I don't know what, you know, my sister-in-law was telling me, you know, like, yeah, he's kind of, what's the deal? And then we started giving them greens, and she's like, he's trying to figure out if we could like do some gutters off of our woodshed. So, I mean, you try it and you realize there's something to it, so that's it.
Okay, next up we have Carl Rosen, Dr. Carl Rosen, to talk about soil tissue nitrate and deep winter greenhouse production.
Great. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Give you one of these in there.
Yeah, okay. Try to keep it to 10 minutes. And good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about soil and tissue nitrate. This is part of a much larger project that was initiated in 2014. I'd like to also acknowledge some of my co-workers on this, Liz Perkis and Justin Carlson. They're graduate students. Liz is in horticultural science, Justice in food science, plant nutrition. Joanne Slavin, professor in food science, plant nutrition, and John Irwin, who is in horticultural science. You'll hear from him in just a little bit. This is a project that was funded by MnDRIVE, and these are supposed to be interdisciplinary projects, which you can see this is interdisciplinary with lots of different departments involved. We're addressing grand challenges, which is basically food production, feeding 9 billion people, and we're also involving the industry with it as well. This particular project was entitled Reinventing Year-Round Local Food Production in Minnesota. And the overall objectives were to optimize vegetable production using winter greenhouses, and then identify which are the best crops. What kind of growing environments do they tolerate? What are the soil requirements, nutrient requirements, and what's the nutrient value? Are they healthy, and overall economics? So it's a fairly comprehensive project. So this was our approach. We tested 6 crops with varying fertilizer amendments. We did most of the experiments on the St. Paul campus during the winter time. So it wasn't a greenhouse. It wasn't really the deep winter greenhouses that you were just describing, but we tried to simulate those types of conditions. But we looked at arugula, red giant mustard, mizuna, kale, spinach, cucumber, and strawberry. And I'm just going to focus on the greens today. We looked at different amendments, conventional fertilizer. We looked at fish emulsion, dried poultry compost, mixture called purple cow potting mix, and then a leaf compost plus added organics, things like blood meal and those types of things. And then we sampled, we grew them for a required amount of time. We sampled the soil, and then we analyzed the tissue as well for nutrients. And we also did a survey of deep winter greenhouses around the state, and we compared our data with some of the soil and tissue data from participating growers as well. So that's kind of the approach. Now, we collected a lot of data. I'm just going to talk about the nitrate today because I only have 10 minutes, right? That's all I can barely cover. So this is kind of the setup that we had in the greenhouse. These are some of the greens that we grew. And so I'm just going to talk about nitrate. And Greg alluded to that as one of kind of a concern. And nitrate is the main form of nitrogen that all plants take up. And so it's not unusual to have nitrate in plant tissue. However, certain plants accumulate nitrate to a greater extent than others. Okay? What happens with nitrate, it's taken up in basically the oxidized form, and then it's reduced to ammonium, and then it gets converted into amino acids, and then proteins and so forth, and lots of different other compounds in the plant. So a very essential nutrient. Of all the essential nutrients, nitrogen is the one that's often most limiting. But it is taken up as nitrate. And certain leafy crops in particular tend to accumulate that nitrate in the leafy parts of the plant. Some plants will actually reduce that nitrate to ammonium in the roots, so you don't see much in the tops. But many of these leafy crops accumulate it in the leafy part of the plants, and it accumulates there. Now, nitrate in itself is not carcinogenic, but it can form compounds that are. So there is some concern from that standpoint. In the U.S., we don't have dietary guidelines for nitrate. We do have it for water, but we don't have it for the produce that we eat. But there are some European standards, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. Okay, so what are the factors that affect the amount of nitrate accumulation that you see in leafy tissue? Well, as you might expect, the type and amount of fertilizer. The higher the rates of fertilizer that you add, whether it's organic or conventional, you're going to see an increase in nitrate. Now, based on a lot of the work that's been compiled over many years, conventional fertilizers, plants grown with conventional fertilizers tend to have higher nitrate accumulation than organic fertilizers. But that doesn't mean that if you use an organic fertilizer, you're not going to get nitrate accumulation. You will. Okay, but it's still the rate. The higher the rate, the more the nitrate. Also, low light and low temperatures will accentuate that nitrate accumulation because lower temperatures, you get less conversion. Plants will take it up, but it's not converted as efficiently to ammonia or reduced to ammonia as efficiently when you have lower temperatures and lower light levels. So that there's kind of another factor that plays into this with deep winter greenhouses. And then, of course, the plant species and varieties. Some plant species tend to accumulate a lot more of this nitrate than others. So that's something else to consider. So these are some of our initial soil nitrate levels on you're on the left side, those were the initial before we did any planting. And you can see with conventional, we had quite a bit of nitrate there. We also had a lot of the other 4 are all organic amendments. You can see the dried poultry compost had the lowest. Fish emulsion, purple cow, and then leaf litter plus organics had quite a bit of nitrate in there. And then we took another sample at harvest, and you can see at harvest, now this is in the soil, not the tissue yet. I'll get into that. But so you can see very low levels in some, but we still had quite a bit of that nitrate still remaining in the soil at harvest. So you can see that, you know, whether you're conventional or organic, you still can accumulate some of that nitrate in the soil. So what happened in the tissue? What you can see here is that on the bottom axis is that's the soil nitrate. We're just relating it to all the different amendments that we had. And then on the y-axis is how much is accumulated in the tissue. And this is all expressed on a fresh weight basis. So that this would be what would be actually eaten. So as you can see in the 3 cases, arugula, mizuna, and red giant mustard, as you increase your soil nitrate, you're going to tend to increase the amount of nitrate in the tissue. Makes sense. And that's what you would expect. One thing that you can see is that the red giant mustard, when you compare it to the other 2, tends to accumulate a given level of nitrate in the soil, tends to accumulate more of that nitrate than, say, arugula or mizuna. Although this, I think, is kind of an odd point there, and mizuna might actually be very similar to red giant mustard. But arugula does look like it accumulates a little less than the other 2. Okay, so what about the survey? So we conducted a survey with deep winter greenhouses around the state. And you can see that we had some really high, some had very low levels, some had very high levels of soil nitrate. And then when you look at the tissue, you can see, again, there's some fairly high levels. Again, the range was there, but there were some that had some fairly high levels in the tissue as well. Okay, so what are the implications for all of this? Okay, so the European standard for nitrate, average daily intake of nitrate is 0.84 milligrams of nitrate per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so that's kind of the standard. So you can kind of figure that out based on an average person. 130-pound person, it's 59 kilograms. You have about 50 milligrams of nitrate per day. And then if you're a little heavier person, 160 pounds, you could ingest 61 milligrams of nitrate per day, based on the European standard. And then if you kind of look at the amount that's in an ounce, and I forgot to bring it in. I was going to bring out what an ounce of leafy greens was. It's in my refrigerator. Forgot it. Anyway, it's about a cup. It's about a cup. And so if you have 100 parts per million and you eat that cup of leafy greens, that would give you 2.8. And then if you're up at that 1,500, you had 42. And then if you're in those really high levels that we saw, 2,500, you'd be up at 70 milligrams. So you're exceeding that, depending on your body weight, you'd be exceeding that European standard. And then just to kind of give you some perspective, we do have a nitrate standard for water. So 10 parts per million, 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate. If you drank a gallon of that water, you would be drinking 38 milligrams of nitrate. So that gives you a little bit of perspective and what we're looking at in terms of what we're eating. So this is just my final slide here. So what can you do? Avoid over-fertilization. That's kind of the main thing. Monitor, and again, I want to reiterate, organic and conventional can contribute. Monitor your soil nitrate levels and in the tissue as well. And then you might consider mixing in some lower nitrate accumulating plants. So the Asian greens tend to accumulate more nitrate than, say, the leaf lettuces. So if you mix those together, you'd and put that in the salad, you'd have a lower amount. So that's my last slide, and I'll be here. I have another meeting at 10 o'clock, so I'll be here for a while, and hopefully if there's any discussion, we can talk about it then.
Thank you, Carl. Very helpful stuff. And next I want to bring up Carol Ford, Garden Goddess. She will talk about some of the work she's been doing, or that she will be doing, I should say. Here you go.
Oh, it's so little. I'm working without a net. I didn't bring any slides because I got 5 minutes. Let's rock and roll. What I'm going to talk about today is that part of this grant that we're working on now with the 5 greenhouses that are being built is that we're going to be doing workshops in them and 2 other sites as well. And this is an opportunity to do some training in the basics of operating these greenhouses and also to do outreach in the communities where they are. We really tried to pay attention to where these greenhouses were selected so that we could have more people aware of what we're doing. You know, it's still, because of course I'm immersed in this, I'm always surprised when I find people who've never heard of it. So, you know, my hope is that as we do these things and we give wide publicity to those events, that we're going to get more and more people interested. And that kind of impacts, when we're doing these at various places, what the focus of those particular workshops is going to be. Because I do want to address what the people who are building them need at the time when, you know, when they're getting ready to do their first year. It's a big learning curve. Because the first thing that they really need to understand, and I don't think you understand it until you're in that environment, is how different it is from any other production anybody's done. It's definitely not outdoors. It's not a conventional greenhouse. It's not a hoop house. There's just a different set of rules in there. And that was a very good discussion about one of them. And I have like lots of questions. But this is really exciting stuff for me. This is like rock candy, being in a room full of people who are super interested in greenhouses. And that's why I love doing the workshops, because I want people's questions answered. I want them to understand what the opportunities and the challenges are and to help them succeed. It is so important that when people get jazzed by this innovative opportunity, that they succeed. Because there's also a lot of other people paying attention to what they're doing. And it's just vital to show them there are choices that you make along the way that really impact if you're going to be profitable or not, which may or may not be a factor for somebody building one of these, but for most of us it is. And what kind of market opportunities you have and how that is going to influence what you plant and when you plant it, how you harvest, how you package, all of those things figure in. So it's good to have that discussion early while people are starting to do their planning. And I wish I'd had all of this before I built my greenhouse. And I think everybody who's built one, usually the first thing they say is, should have been bigger. Things I'd do different. But we're learning as we go, and we're building this incredible amount of information that I didn't have 13 years ago. And it is a solid pleasure to share that. So what I want to do in these workshops that we do is really try to get across what is the major difference as far as when you're growing in a cool greenhouse environment. And I know that we're at a stage now where we're starting to look at different ways that we can even impact that part of it. But as we started, these are cool greenhouses. And that was because we wanted just minimal fussing. You know, as you add more complexity to it, you get to a point of, let's see, do I want to do hydroponics? Do I want to work in soil? For me, it was always about the soil. I'm fascinated by soil. I always will be. So I'm the one to talk to if you like to get your hands dirty. And I'm glad that we have people who want to experiment with the hydroponics. This is an innovative situation, and we should have people trying all kinds of things so we can find out what really works in different environments. It might end up being quite different if you're doing it in the city as opposed to 2 minutes. Oh my God. Okay, so things I will cut. I've done this before, I could do it again. what we're going to be covering are things like the planting schedule, which is unique in these greenhouses, and the best practices for harvest, how you deal with pest and disease control, the soil mix stuff, which is changing all the time. I always cut down on my nitrogen in midwinter. I think I'm probably just going to eliminate it now and see how I do just having nitrogen that's coming from the compost, because I've always wondered about the nitrate. I loved hearing about that. That's important. You know, people who are consumers of our product need to know. And other things, depending on what they need in each of these workshops, whether they want to talk about, well, they're going to talk about record keeping, because I won't let anybody not. It's so important not only for the producer to get valuable knowledge they can apply in their coming years, but to share that with the rest of us, because it's a big part of this, is building this network of growers. And we need to have that information where we can access it quickly. And looking at their markets, looking at how to do maintenance in the greenhouse, all of these things that they are just not focused on when they're first looking at what they want to build and how they build it. Because most of the people that are involved in this are citizen scientists, and I love that because I became one. You start asking questions and you want answers. The beautiful thing about what we're doing is that we're marrying that natural inquisition with practiced research professionals. So when we do have those questions and we're sort of groping in the dark, we have access to people who might just decide that they want to partner with us to get those answers. And that's what these workshops are going to be about, and it's going to be so much fun.
And thank you, Carol. Yeah, I'm sorry to have to cut everybody short. We've had to choose between breadth and depth, and there's just so much to cover, and we need to get in some good discussion here. But so next up we have John Irwin, who's going to talk about a project that's up and coming. So here you go, John.
Thanks, Greg. I am going to try to talk really fast. Carl did a really good job of introducing this. Mine is going to be a little bit more of a stream of consciousness because I'm really excited about all this, and I want to show you like all these slides. I'll just mention also that Liz Perkis is here, and actually all the data Carl and I are doing is there's 2 graduate students. Liz and Justin collected all this stuff, and they're going to keep us writing stuff for years. So, as Carl mentioned, this is a project on reinventing greenhouse production in Minnesota. Why did I say reinventing? This is Bachman's greenhouse vegetable production in Minnesota. Used to almost exclusively be vegetables until interstate highways came about, and then after that they started switching. But more recently they started switching back. So Bushel Boy came into my office in the early 90s and said, I'm going to start a tomato range. I said, you're crazy. And no, he's a millionaire and I'm not. So there's conventional greenhouses, and the stuff that you folks are working on is a newly emerging industry, which is almost like a crowdsourcing of food, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Carl mentioned locations in different parts of the state. Some of you, Ryan's here and Paradox is here, Carol's here, all of you were part of this project, and there's data collected from all these sites as well as conventional sites. And we compared conventional versus deep winter on a variety of ways. One of the most important things we collected from all of you, and thank you for allowing us to put these things in your greenhouses, is we got environmental data. So we're able to compare conventional greenhouse, this is temperatures in a conventional greenhouse, and you can say they're pretty uniform between 50 and 75 degrees compared to a deep winter greenhouse, which is much cooler. You can see it hung out around 50 degrees, and then you would have these spikes in temperature. This was important because now on campus I can simulate a deep winter greenhouse on a larger scale and do more work here that would apply to you guys. So, a couple things. First of all, photosynthesis. Why am I talking about photosynthesis? Because your yield is photosynthesis. The more photosynthesis you have, the more yield you have. Okay? So we've done work on a variety of crops. Some of this is going to be with the MinDrive project, some of this is separate. This is a little separate. This is light versus photosynthesis. If you take each of these numbers and multiply them times 5, you get foot candles. So 600 micromoles, this is micromoles, gives you 3,000 foot candles. And you can see that many of these crops saturate around 3,000. But from this data, we can tell you if you increase your light this much, this will be the increase in photosynthesis you get, which will be directly translatable to the increase in yield you get. CO2, just as important as light, and this is a huge issue in your greenhouses, I think, especially when you're unvented and when it's cold. What's CO2 right now outside? We passed a milestone a week ago. 400, okay? But what happens in a greenhouse? What's happened to the CO2 in this room right now? Is it 400? No, it's going up. Plants would love this room right now because we're just exhaling, okay, constantly, okay? But in a greenhouse, the plants are taking up CO2. So, and when you have these dense canopies in hydroponic systems or in other systems, even more CO2 is being taken up. And what we're finding is this is after an hour in a greenhouse, under low light, medium light, high light, you can see that you go from 400 down to 340 parts per million in 1 hour with medium light, 1 hour. Your plants immediately start getting CO2 hungry. You can add all the light you want, and you're going to have issues with CO2 limiting. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Something we did beyond the project is we also looked at things that you could sell, okay? Now, I'll just come back to what Carl mentioned. Why did we pick those 5 crops? We had a meeting with restaurant folks and grocers, and they said that that's what they would love to get in large quantities. So that's how we. But they also wanted these things. Restaurant owners especially want these specialty things. These are beet greens, broccoli rabe, nasturtiums, pea shoots, watercress, crinkly cress, and all these high-value mini greens that you can have. So we came up with how light affects the growth of each of these, and also how CO2 affects the growth of each of these. Now I can tell you, in most instances, you're both light limited, but you're also very much so CO2 limited. An average conventional greenhouse in Minnesota in December and January, if you measure the CO2 level, it's around 225, like at Lenbush Roses. So you were way below. So CO2 injection, which is actually very cheap, is a way that you can likely dramatically increase yield. A couple other things, we looked at how temperature affects growth. These are temperatures Celsius. So 22 is right around 70 degrees, 72 degrees. And this is red Russian kale versus Fort Hook giant chard. And what can you see about the chard as temperature goes up from 50 degrees to 80 degrees? Okay, photosynthesis goes up. Chard can grow warm. What happens to red Russian kale as you go up to 86 degrees? Once you get over around 65 to 68 degrees, photosynthesis goes down. So there are different crops that are situated or best for each of your greenhouses. Justin looked at, when we were collecting samples from your greenhouses in outstate, we were trying to see what happens with shipping time because we were going to ship stuff. Liz was going to go around and pick it up in a car and everything. This is the amount of vitamin C that is in Mizuna over time. And what can you see about what happens to the vitamin C content in Mizuna over time? Drops off. So what does that tell you about the stuff in a conventional greenhouse or conventional grocery store that came from Mexico or California? Almost nothing. This is a huge and important thing for you folks. Okay? It's a great marketing thing. The grocers don't want to advertise this because they're going to end up advertising all the stuff they got doesn't have anything in it. Incidentally, what was interesting when we compared the local co-op to Cub in town, the local co-op, the vitamin C content was double that was in Cub. Now, is that because the material in Cub is older, or is it because of the growing technique? Then, Liz and I and some students, we had 5 chambers in a basement, growth chambers, and then every morning and every night, we moved plants between these chambers to get 25 different day-night temperature combinations all at once. Okay? It's a hell on our dating life, right, Liz? But you bring in the date. Okay, and then what this is we looked at all different kinds of things, and Carl's part of this, and we're still, it's going to take us years to write this up, Carl. So this is vitamin C content, and where was vitamin C content highest on kale? You can see right around 59 to 68 degrees day-night temperature. And as you had high days and cool nights, you see that the vitamin C content decreased. But then if you look at other nutrients like iron, every time night temperature went up from 50 to 86 degrees, iron went up. But it didn't go up as day temperature went up. Why? I don't know. Okay? Then if you look at something like potassium, this is potassium, yes. Potassium was highest when you had a high day and a cool night. This is an 86 day and a 50 night up there. Okay? Also, by the same token, Carl, I'm glad I pulled my nitrate slide up, but nitrate was highest with a high day and a cool night as well. So then what we can start doing is we can start taking these environments for kale, and we can start putting things together, and we can come up with the day-night temperature combinations that result in super high nutritional content. And I think it's a great marketing ability for you folks to make super greens or brand something. Okay. So something Carl didn't mention, and this is work that Liz did with Mary and Julie Grossman, who are here as well. And you saw the poultry litter and conventional media. And this is from the same stuff that Carl was working on. Remember, poultry litter had almost no nitrate in it? This is the vitamin C level of Mizuna and red mustard in these different mixes. Notice conventional media had a vitamin C level of around 4. This was in the same greenhouse at the same time. Notice poultry litter had what? Quadruple the vitamin C level. This is also the case with fiber. Let's look at fiber. Okay, just some new ideas. I only have 2 minutes, and I'm going to try to get down 2 minutes. You laugh at it, but restaurants want radishes. You can raise radishes in plug trays. Okay. We also started looking at making new potted plants. The University of Minnesota helps the growers that grow stuff for Trader Joe's. The basil that you see, we all help them. So we started coming up with new ideas with colored carrots. It's a little crazy. So I fell and hit my head in the ice last winter, and so we started taking pictures, and we have all different how day and light level treatments and different temperatures affect carrots. We also did the same thing with radishes, because I envisioned these pots with like 8 radishes, and we think it's a saleable product for grocery stores, and people would harvest them. As a matter of fact, the company that we worked with, they're looking at making a mixed pot where there'll be all different kinds of root crops that people can harvest themselves out of a grocery store. So we figured this material out. You folks are interested in what's the best organic feeds. These are all different organic feeds compared to conventional feeds, and we have the data on dry and fresh weight. With all this, these were normalized for nitrate or nitrogen content. And you can see, interestingly, age old was very high, and so was BioThrive and Neptune's Harvest. We're just starting to get into mushrooms. I just have 2 slides left. We're going to be working on mushrooms. We think mushrooms is an opportunity area. There's a larger mushroom grower now in North Minneapolis, Mississippi Mushrooms, that we're collaborating on a grant with. And we're also looking into new lighting technologies and how they may work with what you do. Thanks to some folks. This is the cutting of that's actually a cutting. They take cuttings this big and root them on cactus in California, and that's the national picture of the year, which I think is really cool, right? So, as far as new lighting technologies, we're working on a project where you got a solar panel you put over like a pole barn. Then the wire goes down to a battery. Then out of the battery, it's hooked up to this. So this is a new lighting technology, a Minnesota company. So it even says 3M tape on the back. So when you push this in, it's like the surface of the sun. Okay, so there's no heat, so you can wrap it around your head or nothing. Your hair won't get light on fire. So this thing throws out so much light that this would dramatically increase your yield. And so then the other thing is what's not used up by this. You plug into the wall and you're going to sell electricity back to the grid. So you're making money off the electricity from the panel and your whatever you don't use through the battery. So that's a new project we're doing with electrical engineering, so you would love that. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Oh, yeah.
Geez, John, I gotta follow the cool light thing. Yeah. I mean, come on, I can't follow the cool light
I'll trade you.
Yep.
I'll give you this.
Yeah.
I'll take this.
Yeah, the plants are
Last year I followed
dependent.
the chili pepper guy. He was dressed as a giant chili pepper.
Yeah, you can't follow the chili pepper guy.
I should note, we just have a couple more, and then there's questions and break and all this stuff, so bear with us here. If you need to get up and move around or whatever, please do. Ryan is going in.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm Ryan Pash. Every time I'm on the St. Paul campus, I always got to say I'm a hybrid My wife just says I don't have any hybrid vigor, but here on campus I do at least. So yeah, I'm both a producer in this setting. Yeah, I built one of these things 3 years ago. I've grown in one now 3 years. I'm also a certified organic vegetable operator during the summer season, you know what I'm saying? So I got this thing going on all year round at this point. But I'm also an extension educator, and so it's with my extension educator hat that I did some of this work with this MnDOT Drive project, where we're trying to document, you know, what are people growing? How are they selling these things? What's their upfront costs? What are their direct costs? And all these kinds of things. So I got two little slides that just kind of talk a little bit about what we had learned from the 7 producers that were willing to share their numbers with us. Have you ever done economic analysis? There's always one thing: you got to talk people into giving you numbers, right? It sounds fun, like, yeah, come check out my temperatures, Liz. That's cool. I'm all for it. But then when you say, Brian calls up and you say, you want to tell me what you earned last year on anything and what everything costs? And they're kind of like, well, I don't know about that. So we did have 7 producers that did participate. And so I just thought I'd show you a little bit about kind of what we had learned. And so we have 7 different greenhouses, all just numbered, so you don't know who's who. And right here, these are just revenues and then operating revenues. That is what that means is that we just say, what are the total sales? And then with operating revenue, we're just taking out what are people's direct costs over the course of a season, right? So you have cost in propane, you have cost in terms of soil mix and seeds and these kinds of things. But it's not the cost of the greenhouse, the startup cost. That's on the next slide. And so, you know, one big thing that we learned is just like how you're selling stuff matters. It was quite clear. There are 2 different camps here. We had, as you see, 4 operators that sold through winter CSA operations, and everybody else sort of sold what I call a la carte. That is, like, there's a grocery store here, and the grocery store guy like, yeah, I'll take some greens, so, and I got a friend over here, and I dropped some greens to them. And the difference between just that marketing arrangement was pretty stark in terms of whether you looked at, in terms of people's earnings, if you will, just in terms of getting these sales to begin with. Not even looking at the direct costs. Overall, the direct costs, so it's kind of what you can get in sales makes a big difference, because overall, the direct costs across these 7 operations weren't all that different. Everybody was around about $1,000 for a season in terms of their direct costs. And so it's once we look at operating, you know, how much of your operating revenue compared to gross revenue, where we get this issue about gross margin, right? So for every dollar that you're bringing in, how much are you retaining after you've taken out those direct costs? And, you know, so this guy's rocking it, 81%, right? I mean, nobody comes near this in my mind in terms of summer season, right? I do summer season. Boy, if I had 81% gross margin during the summer, I'd be a wealthy man, but I'm not. So we see these being pretty profitable. The most profitable ones are ones that bring in good numbers here under a CSA arrangement. And we got other people, somebody losing some money, the average is 34. These 2 aren't making a heck of a lot in terms of over their direct costs. The other important part is that this is what you see with direct costs, but the big issue is these startup costs, right? These things are not cheap to build, right? You could go do a cool greenhouse, the Elliott Coleman model, where we're doing, you know, a cool greenhouse, keep it minimally heated, and you're using a hoop house structure. You might have higher direct costs, but your startup costs are going to be less, right? And so we see a heck of a range. You know, Jim, I am a Augusta grad myself, so I had to say that. But in an institutional setting, Jim's talking about, boy, we spent a lot of money on this. And that's an institutional setting. We see a real range in terms of what people invest in terms of startup costs to build these things. From a little under $6,000 to 73. There we go. I was going to say, where's my big one? It's up there somewhere. Yeah. So this is the Cadillac version. You know, the Yugo model, or the Kia model, I guess, or whatever you want. I don't know. But that makes for quite a bit of a difference in terms of cost per square foot. And then I also did a calculation here in terms of cost per square foot of growing space. There's a relationship between those that maximize the space and had the highest sales, right? We only have 7, right? So it doesn't, can you make a big relationship here, Ryan? Probably not. But for example, the greenhouse operator that was most profitable utilized the space the most, right? It makes sense if you're doing this large investment. It's fairly expensive to build this structure. If you're using that structure the most, you're most efficiently using it, you're going to be more profitable. And so, for one idea for me, if I put my farmer hat on, I was telling Greg about this too recently, is, our standards, we've always followed Carol's models, just doing 1, 2, 3 layers above what you're growing in the floor, and with strings. This year, for example, I'm going to just start putting these darn things right next to one another in like 3 banks. Put it as a bank as opposed to, drop the strings, Ryan. I'm cutting the cord, I'm cutting the strings, and then we'll just lay things in terms of like a file system, almost like on over a wood 2x4, so you have 3 ranks that are more solid, right? Just try to maximize that space. So in terms of what next, where do we go with this thing? Obviously, I think we need more participants. We're going to have more participants, more people engaged in this to just learn a little bit. Just have more numbers. You can only say so much about 7 operations, right? But they are 7 real-life operations, I always say. Again, I think there's this issue about, in terms of the questions I always have is, how can we optimize a space in order to get the greatest return? Like I was saying, since those capital startup costs are so high, that is, how can we minimize the building costs and still keep those direct costs consistent per square foot? So how cheaply can you build one of these things? If the direct costs are similar, about $1,000 in terms of a year, the more cheaply you can build this thing and still have it perform well, you're just going to have a better return. Myself, I was talking to Connie, knows this is my obsession lately. We do see some marketing costs. In terms of farm business management, we always talk about marketing costs in terms of what it takes to get a crop to an end consumer. And so in terms of some arrangements, some people were delivering product and things like that. I do think we do need to continue to keep our eye on these marketing costs because we see that in terms of summer season stuff as well as winter season. We gotta identify that in terms of market channel and kind of what's that return over marketing costs. I'd love to see return on lights, right? What's the cost of the lights? What's our marginal increase in terms of production on lights? Also, I think there's something to be said. We did document or try to estimate out in terms of people's labor inputs on a daily basis over the course of the season. How can we document efficiency? How are people using their time? How much? I would suspect some people that have been doing this for a while are probably a little more efficient with their time. I take about an hour a day to play around in my greenhouse on average, I would say. 7 hours a week, that ain't much. You know what I mean? But try to see what things people are doing in terms of being more efficient in terms of growing a crop and marketing a crop out of these winter greenhouses. So there you go.
Thank you, Ryan. And finally, before we have some questions, time for questions, we'll have Kathy Drager come up. Give us ideas for the future. You don't have. Here you go, Kathy. I'll give you a card when you have 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. Wow, that was some exciting things we saw coming down the pike. I'm just, it's really exciting to see all these different ideas and to bring them all together and to let people take a look at what other folks are doing. I think this points out that while we have a number of answers and answers continue to emerge about the work that we're doing, that there's still a lot of questions we have left to ask. So what I wanted to talk to people about today is what are some opportunities that we could collaborate together to ask and answer these questions. So what I'm on the agenda for at this time is just to talk about what might be some potential resources and some places that we could look to for grants. we've been very lucky and privileged to be able to work on a few different projects. For example, Carol came to us with some support from the Bush Foundation. We have gone back to the Bush Foundation twice since then to see if they'd be interested in supporting this work through a community innovations grant. That's a source of funding that's available to nonprofits or local units of governments or higher education, for example, currently now, and it's open now, so if you have other ideas that you think would be appropriate. But this didn't seem to quite fit their criteria for what is a community innovation, though I think we could all definitely see by the presentations today, I mean, this is heart and soul of community innovation. So I don't think we'll be looking there. There is some NSF and USDA support that I think is going to be one of our best opportunities for funding this research going forward. It's called Innovations in Food, Energy, and Water, and it's jointly supported by both NSF and USDA, and it's really looking at what are some of the next generation of ideas that are really going to help us in a future that maybe is constrained by climate issues, water access, resource issues. And so I think that the concepts that we've seen here today would be a prime opportunity for us to apply for those funds. So those range there's a few different categories that we could apply to for those. And I think over the coming months, I'll be suggesting that we go for one of the larger grants that could address some of the nutrition elements we have here. If I could just pause. Do we have a grad student here today from Public Health? We had contacted Melissa Laska, and she's very interested in looking at this as well with us, and she'd hoped to send a grad student today from Public Health. So, but basically, I think we can look at this from the nutrition point of view, the soils point of view that Carl discussed, the horticulture, the production, some of the issues on CO2 and lighting, the marketing issues. And then I think there's also an opportunity for us to work with College of Design, and Dan Handine is here, who's worked on developing those prototypes that are now being deployed around the state. And so I think we could bring in the College Design and start looking at Deep Winter Greenhouse 3.0. So I'm hoping that what comes out of the discussions, which is what we'll be moving into next, is some ideas about where we could go with research, that we could start drafting up this research agenda, and then moving forward and bringing all this together into one really multidisciplinary, multi-sector, including our partners who are producing, the 5 that are being built, and a range of disciplines from here across the university. So if other people have suggestions for funding that we should be considering or looking at or moving forward with, you can please let us know. Diane Seiwald, she was scheduled to be here today but had a family emergency and wasn't able to attend. But she's our Extension Grants Manager. She's helped us write the few grants that we have written for the Deep Winter Greenhouse work, and she is fully behind and supportive of us and will be helping us identify both funding sources as well as preparing applications that meet all the criteria. So in a nutshell, I would say that I think that there are real good opportunities. This is an emerging technology. I think it touches on a number of different areas that we could look at to further support this research. And Greg and I will probably be point persons, as well as Dan, working with College of Design in moving some of these ideas forward. Mm-hmm.
All right, great. So next, it's about time for some questions. If everybody could pass, how about you pass your cards with questions to the center, and I'll come and pick them up down the line. Just as a couple of review, we've had issues discussed about things that came up: hydroponics, space utilization, rainwater collection and design, layering rock on sand in your thermal bed, temperature monitoring, a lot of good temperature monitoring stuff, monitoring nitrate levels in our soil and our tissue. Anybody? Thank you. Carbon dioxide and light limitations, alternative crops, nutritional content, optimizing space for greatest return. Lots of good stuff to think about. So you can continue to write questions if you have them and bring them up. Let me see how much time I've got for this. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes. And I should say after this, we'll have a break and then a discussion, and then there'll be lunch in the other room. Everybody's welcome to stay for lunch, and that'll be an opportunity to kind of do more networking outside of this formal structure. So more questions could be asked directly to researchers or people. So we'll get started here. Oh, also, there's a microphone somewhere. So as people are answering questions, if I had to ask you to use this microphone. The first one's for Carl here.
Yeah, because I got to leave in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
I can come back afterward if there's more nitrate questions. But the ones about monitoring nitrate, is that the one that you were...
I'm just looking at it right here.
I need my glasses. I always forget them. Okay, so... low temperature air is low temperature, low light air question mark, is this impacted by soil temperature? Were multiple cuttings tested for nitrate? What I presented was the first cutting. So we did do a second cutting, but I don't know if we have the nitrates. So, yeah, one of the problems, the main focus of this study was really the vitamin C and some of the other constituents, and so nitrate was kind of an afterthought on it, but turned out to be important. So, I mean, I think that's an area where we need to kind of look at multiple cuttings would be a way, but what I presented was mainly the first cutting. So, and that was the most productive as well, as I remember.
Another one, Carl, do you think a flush of water could take down nitrate levels?
Flushing of water nitrate's very soluble, so it does leach it out, but then, the nitrate goes somewhere, so you don't want to just discard it and have it go into the groundwater and, into the environment. So the best thing to do is to monitor it and make sure that you're utilizing it efficiently rather than flushing it out.
Okay.
So what's the best low-cost way for producers to access accurate information about what their nitrate level, if they don't have all the fancy equipment?
Well,
can you repeat the question?
So the question is there a way that you can monitor the nitrate in the soil and the tissue as a producer? And there is a way. I mean, there are what we call nitrate meters, and we've used these. They're about, they were at one time about $250 for these little meters, and they're handheld. They're flat membranes. You just put the you can squeeze the sap out, and that's when we did a lot of work on these. They're called cardimeters. I don't know if any of you deal with Spectrum Technologies, but they're kind of a greenhouse. They deal a lot of equipment to greenhouses and for monitoring. And so a cardimeter is something that can be used to measure nitrate. And it's manufactured by a Japanese company called Hariba, but it's called a cardimeter. And you can monitor nitrate both in the tissue directly, and then for the soil, usually you need to extract that. And they have these little extraction bags. And, it's a little bit involved, but it can be done. Or you can just send a lot of the tissue and soil to a lab, and they can do it for you. But then that gets costly as well if you do a lot of those. But these little cardimeters are pretty handy and work fairly well.
Another quick question. I don't know if this is if you know this or not, but do you know if nitrate is a health risk for any particular population?
No, that's outside my area of expertise, but that's a good question for the public health person.
Okay, great. So we'll move on. Some of these questions I can't read very well, so I might need some help.
Okay.
What does the sensor in Kim's greenhouse say in, is this Ryan?
Yeah, that's me. So Kim was talking about the sensor on the pipe, right? And you're saying, I don't know, maybe it seems cooler than I expected. I don't know, that's why I heard you say almost. Well, how does that compare to like the one in the ground? I guess I just wanted to hear more about that.
Right, so I think the one I was talking about not being sure how to interpret would be the one that's sitting on top of the rocks. So I have a PVC pipe going right down to the rock, right? So I drop a sensor down and it's just sitting there on top of the rock layer inside of the PVC pipe. And so it seems like sometimes like the readings seem really odd, and I just wonder if like there's condensation of moisture and then airflow causing it to be, you know, a cooler temperature than otherwise, or like sometimes I've seen it just like really drop drastically and you think doesn't even seem possible that that temperature change could have been there. And I guess part of the issue for me is how effective is that for really measuring the temperature of the rocks? So like my goal would be I'd like to see the temperature in the rock increase, right? But maybe a probe just sitting there on top of the rock surface isn't that effective. Like, and does moisture and airflow affect the temperature you're seeing?
It's a measurement question, I guess. I was just kind of curious. Like, I got this, there's all this stuff under there. I assume it's doing its thing. I thought maybe you had some hot insight, like, well, it seems to be doing less than I expected it to, or something, or there's less heat retained than I expected. Like,
yeah, I think for me personally, going into it, I mean, I was always thinking, like, I have to make sure, like, I am efficiently getting it thoroughly hot, right? Like, and like, I don't know, I had this impression, like, it was just going to get really hot down there, right? And I don't think that's happening. Right? I don't think it's getting that hot, but I don't know what it should do either, right? Like how much temperature increase should you see in this rock layer, and how do we effectively measure it? And I rarely see it like when it's cold out, you know, not now, but say in the middle of December, I haven't really seen it over like 55. Yet I don't really know how efficiently is the air moving through it, and each spot you check is different.
I think maybe Jim and Dan over here might have something to say about that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Yeah, let's get you a microphone here.
Yeah, I just want to support what you're saying. On, isn't it? Are we hearing? Okay, about the questions, the temperature data that I showed, the reason I was asking some questions is when I really thought about it as I made the graph yesterday, pulled the data out, I used an aluminum piece of metal to put my temperature probe down in the ground. And I thought more about it, you know, that aluminum probably was a pretty strong conducting path. And I had some tape around it that might have separated, but I didn't control for that. So I think this is like a mini research thing, is a little work on a protocol for measuring. And a rock bed, you probably need 4 or 5 probes, because do you have your probe sitting in the air, so it's getting the air flowing over it? Is it actually measuring the rock temperature? You don't know when you jam it down in the ground. So I really think that that's a quite good question mark.
I'll just touch on that briefly. The 5 prototypes we have, basically it's plastic electric conduit that comes down in the middle in 2 places in the rock bed, sitting basically right vertically in the middle of the rock bed. It comes down and does basically a 90-degree turn, so it's not sitting vertically. That conduit will then get capped, so there's no circulation through there. That ostensibly that sensor should be right at pretty much the ambient temperature that's going to be in the rocks. The only place I know of that they've actually done very in-depth thermal mass monitoring was in this ACEEE greenhouse out in Boulder. That was a $450,000 project, and we simply just didn't have the budget to set that kind of monitoring protocol up. But it would be great to do that in the future. Our premise is that with plug flow, we should have really stable heat flow through there. we're just supposing that 2 monitoring locations will be a relatively accurate indication. The other thing is that, as far as what it's supposed to do, the thing to remember is that the thermal mass is essentially acting as a battery, right? And so, if you're charging a battery from solar power, you're going to have variations, right? And your battery size may change, which is what we're doing with the prototype, basically maximizing the size of the battery. But it's going to vary depending on how much available charge you have and how much you have to run it, and all the other ambient conditions. So it's a moving target, and there's no easy answer about what it's supposed to do. I think every single different design is going to have its own set of variations.
So Dan, is that going to be different too, as far as like if they're monitoring a thermal mass that's sand or rock?
Well, all the prototype ones are rock, so those will be all consistent.
Would it be different?
How do you mean? The temperature would be?
Yeah.
Probably, but I would put in more sensors then. I would put some in the ductwork, and I would put some in the sand bed, because you're probably not going to get the same kind of transfer of heat between, whatever you're carrying the medium through and the actual storage media. So, yeah.
All right. Well, there's a lot of questions here, so I'm sorry we probably won't get to all of them, but we'll keep churning them out here. Kim, how many times did you fill the water barrel? You could just say it. I could repeat it too. It's just a
Sure.
number.
I was just going to say, I don't know exactly how many times, but I would say it was probably every couple weeks. I don't know an exact count, but, I watered with a watering can, so I'd just fill it up, and we'd drag a hose in, fill it up, and drag the hose back out on a sunny day. So maybe every couple weeks, maybe more toward the, spring, but.
Yeah. Great, thanks. John. Is there a difference in atmospheric carbon dioxide in the summer versus in the winter? I think I have another one for you. Too.
It's not. No, they measure it on top of, the official site is the top of the mountain in Hawaii, and there's not a difference. I would add, just with CO2, most people say, well, how can you add CO2 to one of your greenhouses? We looked at 2 different methods. One is buying dry ice and throwing dry ice into a greenhouse and then circulating that air. And the other option is if you literally have a 5-gallon bucket with yeast, and the yeast will ferment, you can add a half a cup of sugar a day, and it's enough to do a deep winter greenhouse. It'll sit there and bubble. I don't know how much it'll smell, but it'll bubble.
How much does the new lighting technology cost?
I have no idea. It's coming down really fast. We're actually trialing in grow chambers right now where we're lighting all the way around, because part of the issue is when you light from the top, you're only lighting just the top leaves. So we're looking at side lighting as well. And I would just add on lighting technology for grants. A great potential new thing, I think, would be with 3M and light tubes, where you would move light from a place like a pole barn roof into your deep winter greenhouse with a passive light tube, which takes no energy.
Thanks. Jim? Can you talk more about your rainwater collection? And how do you gather and store and apply the water, and do you use other water sources?
Yes, we're using other water sources because that pressure thing I mentioned. We started out with, it's just a couple of polyethylene tanks, and there's a gutter on the greenhouse, and it comes down, comes through the greenhouse, drops into the tank, and then there's an overflow going out the wall. And initially, just this first run this spring, I dropped a sump pump in there and hooked a hose to it, so people could water. And then I got a Menards irrigation timer, and that's when I realized and this is pretty common, electric valves depend on, and it's not a big electric, it's actually a battery powered just irrigation valve to hook on your faucet, and they require a little bit of pressure to operate. And I don't quite have enough with the tank. So at this point, it's set up now where we can run it. If we want to turn the pump on, we can run. We've got drip irrigation tape, and we could run it with that. Or if we want it automated, which is what we really needed it for, so the students didn't have to be there every day. On hot days, you really got to watch it. So we hook it up to we do have a hydrant in there, and we're using that. Based on that little bit of time with the sump pump, I think with 1 or 2 more tanks, and I've gotten one since that picture was taken, we probably can run most of the time on rainwater because it's a pretty efficient operation, and we probably can get by. So I think that matches Kim's experience with the barrel. If you place the water well, down on the plants, it's a pretty efficient operation with water.
There's a question here I think I can answer. What will the 5 sites have as backup heat options? It's propane, right, on all the sites. So they'll do propane backup heat. For Ryan,
yeah,
here, right in front of me.
Hi, Ryan.
Were labor costs included in the
Yeah, no, I didn't, the labor costs were broken out separately. They're not included in those direct costs. So it isn't like we gave everybody $10 an hour on their labor costs and then worked that in to the direct costs. What we did is we just said, okay, taking out the direct costs, the cleanest thing it seemed to do was to say, okay, what's the amount of time that you spent? What's your return over direct costs? And then we just calculated, basically, you saw what you presented, Greg, in terms of what people are doing on a per hour basis. So you're investing X number of hours, somebody's doing as high as $20 an hour in terms of the time they're investing in getting a return on over direct costs. And some are as low as 2 or, negative 5. So, yes.
Okay, is there any research on soil temperature impact on plant growth and yield? I don't know if Liz or John or anyone can.
I'll mention something brief, but Mary might be a person to talk to on that. So, plants respire. All of us are sitting here and are respiring right now. We're using energies, and so some plants like spinach respire really fast. So we're actually starting a project where we're looking and selecting plants that don't respire fast because they're not going to lose mass. And so as soon as you cut something, it starts losing mass. That's why we refrigerate things. So the soil temperature is going to affect the roots. The roots are going to affect respiration. That's going to affect the amount of energy that the plant made, and it's going to use it up. So we're looking at that. So hot soil temperatures are generally not good after rooting. Liz has something to say.
So one quick thing I would say, not about the plants, but about the microbes in the soil, is that if you're using an organic fertilizer that needs some decomposition from microbes, it'll go faster if the soil is warmer. So it might not be your plants, but you might be relying on the microbes to make your fertilizer available. So that's a thought.
So does anybody have any idea what an optimal size of deep winter greenhouse would be for commercial use? I don't know if anybody can speak to that or wants to tackle that.
I'll kind of tackle. I guess I'll just throw out my own example. It kind of depends how commercial you want to be, I guess. I mean, so for me, in my own experience, look, I spend about $1,000 on direct costs annually over the winter season. Mine's, I don't know, basically 10 by 32, right? So it's not big. It's not different from what these other ones are. And, at the end of the last week, I took in $5,000. It's my end of year nest egg after I've done a summer season. That's what it looks like for me. I think for every single operation, people have different profit goals and objectives, right? So to me, I don't want an operation that's going to take 40 hours of my time in the winter season. I don't, because I work 80, 90 hours a week during the summer, and I kind of like doing it in a 1 hour a day kind of thing at a certain manageable, right? And so you have a return, a greater return the larger the operation, but then you have to have the inputs, including your own labor, to manage the operation, right? So you need to determine what kind of an operation you want to look like. So that's why I look at it.
Another question for you. Banks of planters, are you worried about shade?
I am worried about shade, but Ryan just has to sit and look at light for a while and see, because they're going to get tiered up, right? This is what I picture. Well, man, needs some new lighting, right? But I'm going to have like tiers. I mean, it's very steep, right? So I'm just going to tier the thing up. If I can get, I'm pretty sure I can get 3 tiers, low, medium, high. Maybe I can get 4 tiers. I got to sit there with a, framing square and a tape measure and sit in there and look at whether the light's going to hit it the right way. That's as scientific as I get. I'm sorry, guys, but it's just me and some 2x4s.
Okay, one more quick question. I think I can answer this, but maybe you want to. CLC in Brainerd, not Staples, right?
Yes. We have 2 campuses. The horticulture department is actually in Brainerd, and there is a farm in Staples. principles, so sometimes that gets a little bit confusing, but I teach the greenhouse production is in Brainerd, so that's where all this is going to take place. Yep.
All right, thanks everybody. We're gonna take a break now, and we're gonna rearrange the tables a little bit. So if everybody wants to get up and get the last,
We can talk.